Well, we welcome you to another segment of Way of Wisdom, and we are still working our way through Proverbs chapter 13. And today I want to give you a promise concerning generosity. A promise concerning generosity, and there's two verses we want to look at in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 7 and verse 22. Verse 7 says, "There is one who makes himself rich, yet has nothing, and one who makes himself poor, yet has great riches." That's interesting, isn't it? And then we'll read the second part of this promise in verse 22. "A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous." Well, let's take the first one. And that is the one we saw in verse 7. Verse 7 of Proverbs 13. "There is one who makes himself rich, but he has nothing." What does that mean? The person who never gives, who's never generous. They're always just heaping to themselves, storing up more, storing up more. God looks at that person who is not generous and says, in reality, you have nothing. It's like the Old Testament prophet said, you have a bag full of holes. You put in, but it just keeps falling out. You have nothing. And yet there is one who makes himself poor and yet has great riches. That's the one that is very generous to give. And somebody say, well, if you give that much, you're going to be poor. But like Gigi, Lorraine's great-grandma used to say, well, they called her great-grandma, Gigi, she was the kid's great-grandma, but she used to say, you can't outgive the Lord. There is one who makes himself poor. What does that mean? They're giving things away. They're being generous in their attitude and in their spirit and in their heart, and yet they have great riches. Well, you can't save it up. You can't take it with you, as they say. Now, it does talk about the next generation and blessing the next generation. Look at verse 22. "A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous." In other words, God sees to it that somehow the righteous will receive what they need if they're generous. And so I would encourage you in a couple things. Look for opportunities to be generous. After all, God is generous. God so loved that he gave. And look to bless future generations. Don't be one that says, I want it all for myself now. No, be willing to store up for future generations. And God can provide. God can store up the wealth of the wicked and turn it over to the righteous. Many times God provides in supernatural ways and ways that we would not have imagined, totally unexpected ways. So let's be generous. We see the same principle in 2 Corinthians chapter 9. It says, "God is able to make all grace abound to you, that always having all sufficiency in all things may have an abundance for every good work." He's just said God loves a cheerful giver, the verse before. "He has dispersed abroad, he has given to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. Now may he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food supply and multiply the seed you have sown and increase the fruit of your righteousness, while you are enriched in everything for all liberality," or generosity, "which causes thanksgiving through us to God." Notice he says he'll give seed to the sower, the one who's generous, the one who gives, who sows. And so look to the Lord. Trust him with what you need. Thank him for what he's provided. But always have a generous heart. May God bless you today as you continue on in the way of wisdom.
Worthy of it all.